welcome everybody. Welcome back to this week's episode of Dose Chai. My name is Efren, and with me is my trusted co-host Coop.
What's happening?
So we were thinking of an idea. We had one, but Coop gave a better idea. So I'm gonna let him lead off the topic of what this week's episode is about.
All right. So I know it's always dangerous swimming in deep waters because there's sharks there. But this week in my civics class, we've been talking about Make America Great Again. And we've been talking about that concept and that idea. And I always love having these conversations with Efren because I know he always has a unique perspective. So today, no matter if you're a Democrat and Republican, people forever have been talking about a third party. And in class, when we talk about Make America Great Again, a lot of students are starting to say that MAGA feels like a new party. And to me, it seems like that group that started in the 2008 election cycle, the
Like
Tea Party.
Tea Party in the grass, yeah.
Yeah, that Tea Party movement, which was a populist movement, which, simple, I mean, all those political slogans still work. So the Tea Party taxed enough already.
Yep.
And that group was very successful in elections. They got Eric Cantor elected, and there were the group of Republicans, the Freedom Caucus, that still exists
today. You're right. Yep.
That were marching to a drum. And then President Trump, or former President Trump and future President Trump, I don't know, emerged. And in some ways, part of that team that maybe leaned more to the right transformed into that Make America Great Again team. And as Make America Great Again as a slogan is a fantastic presidential slogan. We know that Bill Clinton used it in 92. We know that Reagan used it in 80. And then Donald Trump has used it. And the reason why it's such a great slogan is just generally making something great again. Most of the time is seen as a positive.
Yeah, I mean, I could see going back to, when Bill Clinton was running, that was a big deal because they had the 12 years of Reagan and then 8 years of Reagan and 4 years of Herbert Walker. So it was essentially 12 years of the same ideology. So I could see where they want to go back to the values that the Democratic Party had. So that makes sense and whatnot. But like you and I were speaking earlier, it almost feels like that slogan now has been assimilated into a bad connotation. It's like it's funny watching people ask, well, when was it great? To me, America has always been great. It's had its faults, it's had its inaccuracies and stuff that way. But when? Well, it was great in the 1960s, before the Civil Rights Act, before women could vote, well, I ain't saying all that. I want all the good parts, but you can't have the good. You got to have the bad with it. It's two sides to every coin.
Yeah, I mean, America's history is unique. And I'm always telling students the uniqueness of it is what makes it great. So the fact that women who were oppressed and couldn't vote, I always love the story that women were elected before they could vote, which means men voted for them. And women contributed to the fabric of America, even though they didn't have a vote in the process, but they still were contributing to who we were. Same thing with African Americans and Hispanic Americans and Native Americans.
Oh, yeah.
So to me, it's like the collective. And I mean, most of the times when you have a messy country like this, you end up with some type of civil war and the country splitting. So like if we go to Central Europe and you pull up one of those maps from like the 70s, then the 90s, then today, what was Yugoslavia is now several countries.
Yeah.
So the fact that through one very messy war and a couple different societal revolutions, America has stayed one country. So in some ways, when we reflect on it, I think about, and I'm an 80s kid. I was born in 1980. So I remember in the early 90s when you could go to a grocery store with $5 and leave the store with a gallon of milk, 2 boxes of Little Debbie's cake, bag of Doritos, and 50 cents in change.
Yeah, you could definitely feel like you were king for a day.
Yeah, I mean, you got all the junk food you wanted. And you think, man, that $5 used to stretch so much. But today you go into a grocery store at that same $5, you're getting maybe 1 gallon of milk and like a single cupcake. And so in that way, I think like economically, man, America was great in the early 90s for a kid who was broke.
Is it one of those things that, is it like everything else, money, the root of all evil, that it's caused companies to be more greedy because they want more for their bottom line, more for their not taxes, but more for their stockholders to give money back to them? So that's kind of sort of driven it up, and it's made it okay to charge higher rates and higher prices?
I never know what the key is. Like when you think of economics, and you think of economics as like the distribution of limited resources. So then when you think of America and limited resources, it's hard to think of food that way. So if you go into a Target or a Walmart or a Harris Teeter, the shelves are full.
Yeah.
And then you think, man, these prices are so high. And then somebody will come to me and be like, yeah, but wages are up. And I'm like, yeah, but the minimum wage in North Carolina is $7.25. That's the same that it was in like 2005.
Yeah, it's never been any higher. And that's one of those things that we remarked when we had family vacation. We went up to Seattle, and it was very jarring going through like a Target, like you said, and there were just like basic things under lock and key, like deodorant and detergent and underwear for men and stuff. And it was weird to see those things, under lock and key. And talking to my younger brother who lives there, I said, why is it like that? He said, well, a lot of the stores just can't hire staff anymore because the minimum wage is so high there in Seattle or in Washington. It's like $19 or $20, whatever it is up there for them. So they're running the store at like the bare minimum, at like 8 employees, because they don't really have, one, they can't hire people because people don't want to work. But two, you just can't have 30 people in a store at $20 an hour because, you're paying, $500-$600 an hour to get people to work. If you have 30 people at $20 an hour, you just can't do that anymore. So it just gets to the point that at some point they have to stop passing the buck off to us as consumers and stuff in that way. But do you think they'll ever get back to the point that a company will say, hey, we got enough money, let's loosen some of these rates and dollar signs?
I think the corporate model, the corporation has changed that because if I'm an investor, I want to make money. So if I have Target stock and then I open up the paper and it says Target is lowering prices, I'm thinking I want to make more money, maybe in the long run, but maybe I want buybacks. Maybe that's the route I prefer, is the company giving me my money back that I've already invested. So I think that's where it becomes like the hard part. And the problem is, and maybe this gets to the core of it, is when I was a kid, there was also tons and tons of small businesses.
Oh yeah, that was a
so
lot.
For every Walmart, there might have been 4 or 5 specialty stores where when you went in there, it was a family-run shop. So maybe the father wasn't paying everybody a salary, a traditional salary, but instead maybe they were splitting the profit as a family. So then they could afford to have prices at a level where people in the neighborhood could appreciate it.
So do you think that ultimately the avenue of making the world simpler and a more centralized, like a spoken wheel kind of sort of mentality, that by going to a more centralized environment like a Walmart or Target, stuff with that way, it squeezed out the smaller companies and in actuality made it worse for the consumer?
Yeah, so you always think about that in being from a city like Chicago, right? So when I was a kid, on every block you'd have like ethnic restaurants.
Oh yeah.
And so then you think, man, it's the greatest thing. But then in those neighborhoods, there was no McDonald's or Burger Kings. So you always got the ethnic restaurants, but you wanted the McDonald's because McDonald's was smart enough with their marketing that they had Michael Jordan in the commercials, McDonald's in the movies.
Yep.
So then you wanted those things. And then I think it's a double-edged sword because then it's this thing called like felt needs in a community. So like a barber, like a local doctor, and people who, they're from the neighborhood, so they know the neighborhood, right? So, I remember in Chicago, you had a whole bunch of black barbershops. But I remember when Middle Eastern dudes started moving into the neighborhood and opening up barbershops. And then all the Middle Eastern dudes, at first, they were not excellent barbers for black men. But the longer they stayed there, the better they got at it. But then their prices were lower. So for a long time, you were like, man, I'm going to go to Bubba because that's my dad's barber. But you were paying $7 a cut. And then the Middle Eastern dude down the street is like $4 a cut. And the first couple of times, it wasn't great. You had to wear a hat for a while.
I mean, clearly the sacrifice.
Yeah, but the economics of it made sense, so you shifted barbers. And I think that's what's happened with everything. And it's so crazy because one of my favorite movies is You Got Mail.
Oh,
If
that
you
movie.
remember that movie, the bad guy in that movie is Barnes & Noble. They don't call it Barnes & Noble, but it's clearly the big bookshop coming in,
Yeah.
taking over for the
shop around the corner getting rid of because Fox and Sons. Yeah.
But now today, people go to Barnes & Noble just to keep it open because Amazon has absolutely obliterated it. In fact, I go to Barnes & Noble sometimes and I look at a book and I want to buy it, but then the capitalist in me pulls out my phone and sees the price on Amazon.
I mean, that's definitely the hardest thing with that way. It's definitely a sword that cuts deep because you're right. You want to be able to find the book immediately. Barnes & Noble's got it there. But being the capitalist, being the, hey man, I try to stretch this dollar as far as I can save $3 or $4 or something on Amazon, and you go and do it that way. But then you have to, most people don't factor into it, the annual fee to be on Amazon Prime or all that other things. So it's, indirectly, you're kind of sort of paying the same price if you think about it that way, but it's the immediacy of, man, I'm saving money. I'm going to do it this way, and that's what you want to do.
I went to, I'm gonna maybe this is our first sponsor opportunity. I went to a Greek restaurant today, Mythos.
Oh, I love that place.
And I noticed something that was super interesting. I ordered my meal, and the gentleman told me how much it cost, and I went in my pocket to pay, and I pulled out cash. And it was $1.12 cheaper. Because when you run the card, he's paying a fee.
Yeah, 3%.
So they've now factored it in. And again, it's just one of those things where you think like the sacrifices we make, everybody now is almost cashless. So everybody's scanning their card, but nobody's looking at the fees that you're being charged because of the card. So it's interesting to see it go from it was 18 something and it dropped down to 17. And as the person who is known for being frugal, I was like, I gotta go to the bank and keep more cash on me because I don't know how many times I'm paying for this transaction fee for using the debit card.
Yeah, no, that's the second restaurant that I've frequent that now does that. And they ask you when you go to pay for it, hey, are you doing this card or cash? I was like, card, okay. And I've started paying attention to somebody in front of me, asked them that way, and it went down, and I was like, oh man, that's what they're doing. And they've started putting a sign out front that if you pay with cash, they're not saving the 3.5 or 3.2 for whatever it is, the percentage of the doing the credit card and stuff with that way.
The YMCA did that this week. They sent you a letter in September saying, hey, if you have your YMCA membership on a debit card, your dues are going up $3 a month. So if you need to change it to a check card, this is the time to do it. And they said the reason why we have to do this is because the cost of living is going up. And it's weird because the state of North Carolina hasn't changed the minimum wage.
Yeah, they have not.
But like you said, employers have to because they want to keep employees, but they got to give them raises. And it's just one of those things that we just don't think about because you're just so busy scanning the card that, and to me, I'm always like, when you actually spend the cash and you get that change back and you feel the deduction in your pocket, it's very different than the card. And I mean, we're talking about that Make America Great Again, just how money has changed. But I even thinking about it with that Barnes & Noble example, the library. When I was a kid, the library was like a community center.
Oh yeah, everybody went.
Yeah, so you used to go there, you could hang out at tables and read, but they would also do like arts and craft projects. And this summer, our local library, I take my kids in and I noticed that those programs were massively reduced. And I was like, why? They were like, well, first of all, there aren't nearly as many people coming to the library anymore. And I'll be honest, I use the Libby program. So there are some books that I check out online and I read on my tablet. So from that alone, there's not as many people coming through the turnstile. So then they say, then our need for staff goes down. So then we don't have extra staff to do the resources centers and do the craft nights. And it's just crazy to think about, like, right now, if you want to sign your kid up for a community center event, it's probably through a school sport. And I found out the hard way this week or in the last couple of weeks that when your kid plays at a public school football, they got to buy their own chin strap. And they got to buy their own pants. And I was like,
wow.
Yeah, things have changed. And again, you just wonder, is it because maybe now they're reducing other areas, so they got to say we got to charge you here.
So it's definitely one of those things that, to me, I wonder how much of it is just like a placebo effect of whoever is sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania is going to make my world a little bit better. And I think a person at that level has no difference on what's going on. It's those local politicians, those local people here in town and stuff that way. Because I know when we were in school, you didn't pay for those things. They were given to you as part of the idea of signing up. Now, they might have had like an equipment usage, something that way they used to started doing, but never equipment stuff that way. I wonder how much of it gets to the point of that by you putting skin in the game, does it make you more apt at taking care of those pieces of equipment and stuff that way? Is it?
I mean, I'm not even like the funding of schools, because like right now in Guilford County, the bus situation.
It's brutal.
So I had a parent the other day say like, hey, kids are walking to school because there's not buses available, but I'm starting to see the sports teams travel for games on those same buses that they say they can't use. So it's like they've prioritized sports. I mean, some of these schools have elementary age kids walking, and it's dark out. I mean, my daughter goes out for her bus at 6:32. So we know in November we're going to fall back. So it's going to be even darker. You just start to wonder, like, we think the money is there. And, I mean, North Carolina, we had it legalized gambling, so there's taxes on there. And you just wonder who pays for those things. But when we think about America being at its greatest, I mean, bus stops and getting to school was never an issue. And the stuff I'm seeing today, I'm just saying, like, the taxes, property taxes in Guilford County go up every year.
That's correct.
So it's the allocation of the taxes that make you think like, man, we got a second grader walking to school holding hands with her kindergarten little sister.
Yeah.
And I'm just like...
It does then get back into that whole thing of the capitalism, because I've heard of like Waymo cars, I think, in California, that are like driverless cars, where they've had to start putting restrictions of no people under like 18, because a lot of the parents were, they weren't fans of the Waymo cars, because evidently when they come back to the parking lot, they honk at each other as a way of, hey, we're back to the little home base, like a Roomba used to do, or still does. But evidently now they've started cracking down on having the kids not being under the age of 18, because a lot of the parents are trying to bypass, because there are no buses in California, and putting them in these driverless vehicles to send your kid to school.
Wait, they have an Uber Kid program too.
Right.
And I mean, just being honest, me and my wife have talked about it, because we have kids in dance and football and baseball. So there are nights when it's like, well, dad has to, manage a cross-country event, and mom is still at work, and it's only 2 miles away from the house. Can we put our kid in a car with a stranger?
It is very weird, because when we were growing up, don't take candy, don't talk to people, and don't talk to strangers, don't get in the cars with people you don't know. And what do we do? Halloween's never changed. We still keep candy. We get in cars with strangers, and they're always giving stuff out. So it's like, it's that weird thing how we've kind of sort of regressed some of the safety things, but yet you want to still be more safety conscious now than what we were many decades ago.
Well, we talk about that again, that same theme of great again. America used to feel, even though we always had serial killers and hate crimes and gun violence, but America always felt safe.
So is it that we live in the news cycle of 24-hour news cycle?
And social media, which is, I mean, CNN is the birth of it, but today it's like, if there is, I remember I was in high school when Columbine happened. And I remember we had TVs in exploratory science room. And I remember ABC broke in and people turned on the TV. And I remember watching that and feeling terrified. Really? But by the time I was in college, it was already becoming desensitized. But on the other hand, I also was a student in school leaving my dorm room when 9/11 happened. And again, we watched that all unfold on TV.
Yeah, see, I don't remember, because I was a junior in 95 when that happened. I don't remember Columbine being on TV as much when it happened.
Columbine was later than 95.
I feel like it was April 19th of 1995.
April 20th for sure.
Well, because, so there's this weird week, and Coop, I don't know if you ever heard of this, but there's this week, like there's a 7-day stretch from like the 11th through the 19th or something that way they refer to it as Hell Week. And look back at all the catastrophic events that
April
happened.
20th, 1999.
99.
You know what April 20th is? The significance of it?
So there's a lot of dates like that. The Oklahoma City bombing happened that same week.
But you know what April 20th is? Hitler's birthday.
Oh, really? See, I thought you were going to make the joke about it being 420.
Yeah, well, people do that one too, but I think it legitimately is Adolf Hitler's birthday.
So it is weird how a lot of things kind of sort of happened that week, but I don't remember that being on TV. Okay, so maybe I got confused because I remember when I was in high school, they did a moment of silence for the Oklahoma City bombing, which happened in 94.
Yeah.
And what, or 90, yeah.
Yeah, I was like 14.
Yeah,
I
94,
remember that.
95.
But Columbine, I
Wow,
definitely...
99. Wow, I thought that was earlier. I thought I was in school. So see, that's why I wasn't aware of it because I wasn't, by then I had already graduated.
Yes, I was still in my senior year, so yeah, I remember
Wow.
literally, because I remember watching kids jump out of the building, and I remember my people in our school were looking around like, what will we do? And I think for America, because there had been school shootings prior to that, but I think Columbine was the first one that people
Yeah, I
watched
don't
on
think
television.
anybody, prior to Columbine, I don't remember anything about it. I mean, like to me growing up, I remember where I was when the Challenger exploded because we were in school. I remember that was a big deal when I was in school. They would put that on TV to watch the NASA launches because that was great. That was like the epitome of America's greatness. They could do no wrong. Hey, we smart people in the world. Let's put people on a space shuttle and send them off to. So that was cool with it being a teacher. And after it exploded, they turned it off and we didn't watch it anymore on TV. That was the last thing
Yeah.
I remember doing that way. And then I don't remember Columbine being in school because that was in '99. I was already out of school, so I don't remember that way. But I remember where I was when like the Columbia exploded in 2003 and stuff were that way. So it is interesting how things kind of sort of come back. But I do think the 24-hour news cycle has, like you said, desensitized us to this weird thing of just always being immediate. And then it's bad from the standpoint of that prior to that, we just had a recent school shooting here in Georgia that 4 people were tragically killed. I was saying to a coworker, this is weird to make this statement, but I don't remember when the last televised or news broke about a school shooting this year. You almost feel like it's got hills and valleys, like it comes and goes.
Do you know how many there's been this year since August?
See, Coop, you being a teacher, you're keenly aware of these stats.
So I said the number is 45 that fall under the description of a school shooting.
45.
I think there was one today in Maryland.
And I know mass shootings, if 2 people
So
are
I think
dead.
with a school shooting, somebody in a school, and the one in Maryland, I think it's Maryland. I apologize, Maryland, if I got the state wrong, but I hear of a fight that escalated and somebody pulled the gun. So even in that situation, someone was shot, they would consider that to be a school shooting. So, yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I know there was one in a young man, domestic situation, college student in Wisconsin. So yeah, that only counted 2. So more than we think. I think you're right though about and maybe this is again about that America Great Again, because when I was a kid and I thought about TV, I thought about sitcoms. Like I used to love watching Family Ties and The Cosby Show and Who's the Boss. Like those were the things that shaped it. But today, because we don't have those traditional family sitcoms, I guess Modern Family was like the last one.
Yeah,
I mean, my wife would probably say Ted Lasso. I never got into Ted, but
that was a good one. But that really wasn't about like the youth of America.
Yeah.
That was some family thing. Yeah.
So to me, it's still like I remember for me, the switch was 2003. Right? So if you remember, Columbine happens, then almost right after it, you get the Bush-Gore election.
Oh, yeah.
And then
chance.
less than a year later, you get 9/11. But to me, the switch is 2003, Iraq War, shock and awe. Because I remember that being like prime time TV watching.
Yeah, now...
Like, we're watching war on TV.
Yeah, I do remember being at work and watching the green infrared cameras and watching the missiles take off.
They were like they did it like it was like a movie, like it was Transformers, like shock and awe. And I remember the moment when George W. Bush landed on the
aircraft carrier. Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished. And
That's right, the banner.
You got he looks like Maverick from Top Gun.
And the flight suit.
And you're like, oh man, this is so cool. And you're like, at that point, I think what happens is our reality started to feel like something more than reality. And then when social media comes into it, now everybody questions this man, is that real? That looks so manufactured. Can it be real? And I think maybe from that moment on, now everything we see, we question.
So do you think with making America great again, is it when we were the policemen of the world, the saber rattling of the world? Is that when we were on top, when there was a problem, America would go figure it out, we would solve it? To prove how great we were, we had to step in to take care of it? Is that maybe connotation for people theme to think it making America great again when we were a superpower? Is that what people wanted?
Or maybe we were uninformed in that. So when we think about Korea and Vietnam, we never think about draws or losing the war.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Especially as kids post it, because then we read about it in history wars, in the history books, and we read it as like we have this noble cause to spread democracy. But then once we get the news cycle and journalists embed it and they're live on TV, and all of a sudden you're starting to ask questions and say like, whoa, should we really be there? I think that social media and the news gave us perspective truth rather than absolute truth. Where
100%, 100%.
When you read it in a book, you feel like you're reading 100% truth and you don't question if it's manufactured. But now, I mean, this week, Donald Trump said he lost the election. And some of his supporters have come out and said, well, Donald Trump is now acknowledging he lost the election. Then some of these cases against him seem real because Stop the Steal was supposed to be this thing that he can prove that happened, and the corrupt Justice Department has been lying. So, but then again, it's like when we have 15 news channels and 50,000 YouTube channels reporting the news, I mean, we hear how many different sides of every story. And then I always tell my students, I'm like, truth is difficult. Because if I drop a ball, we can all say I dropped the ball. That seems very truthful. One person's going to say he didn't drop the ball. He slammed it to the ground or it slipped out of his hand. And everything is perspective at that point. And it's like that postmodern ideology that there's no more absolutes. That's why every once in a while you get that one kid who will be like 2 + 2 doesn't always have to be 4. You know, like, yes it does. And then they try to break down the dynamics of Terrence Howard and how can you take one factor and multiply it by another factor and still have one? I'm like,
it does almost remind me of that one phrase where people say, you know, if you repeat the lie enough, it becomes the truth.
Oh, yeah.
And whatnot. So it gets at that standpoint of that. But it is interesting. It's almost like a convoluted game of telephone. We could be watching something and you see it one way and I see it a different way. Like the game of telephone, it'd start with one person. And by the time I got to the end, the message was so far removed from what it originally was. It's like, you're in the same room with me. How did you not hear what I just told you? Pass it down that way because people will hear something differently in their mind and they'll see it a different way.
Part of that is the fact that we build the structures of our societies on lies, right? So when your kids are small and they lose a tooth, the tooth fairy brings them money.
I mean, you're right. Spoiler alert, hashtag, I don't know, we're like 28 minutes in, so we want to be sure you don't listen to this with your kids, but it's already happened, so sorry.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that every once in a while when your kids get to that teen age, they're 13 and 14, and they're starting to critically think, and they start saying, like, why do we have these lies? Why are there these constructs in our house in the first place? Like, Mom, Dad, we don't have a chimney. Yet Santa comes down the chimney every December 24th.
Well, do you think it's as a way to, as parents, and obviously there's two sides to this question, do you think it's done as a way to keep your innocence? Because when I was little, we didn't have a chimney because we lived in a manufactured home, and I didn't think about that till I was older and stuff was that way. And even when we moved to our house that we lived in when I grew up till I graduated high school, it was a stovepipe, so we didn't have a chimney in the true sense. So that way, so I didn't have a fireplace. We had like a wood burning stove and stuff like that. But you don't think about it. Do you think it's done as a way to keep those kids little and their imaginary always constantly going?
I mean, I think you got to flip the question. What about when we do it to adults? So what about when the president gets on TV and says we're going to this remote part of the world to take democracy there? but there's also a deposit of oil. And they never tell us that piece. And then later on, they say it was economic interest.
It's definitely one of those things, like you said, the shock and awe, it was the bad because of what they wanted. They were trying to go and do it that way. But then the further you get into it, were they going to get the oil from there? Or did he go because, W had a revenge plot, to go against, because, Saddam Hussein was bad against his father. So it is weird how after it happens, then you want to go in to ask the questions. You want to then investigate what was the purpose of going into those things. And it does, I think, taint people's, belief of patriotism or, America was great because, hey, we just went into this country that needed help. Yeah. Now it's like, whoa, should we have even gone in there? Did we now make the world worse? Or is that area more unstable or whatnot?
So did technology get us there? So if you go back 40 years ago, and you say that when you tell people, for the most part, there's always been conspiracy theorists out there.
Oh, yeah.
But when you say Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK, period, right? But then when the technology gets around and people start asking more questions, you go, weren't we better off when people believed that it was just one insane person that committed one insane act and let it be? We don't need people to ask the next question. Because can you be a patriot if you don't trust the system? Can the system work if people are asking too many questions?
I mean, that's an excellent point because I think you want to believe that a larger entity or a person with more power would do the right things for the greater, do better for the greater good, for the many opposed to the few. Would be great, but it is an interesting perspective to think of that way because like Trump and all of his things, they were talking about how in New York, he wasn't going to get a fair trial, that's why he was found guilty and all that stuff that way. But they had another prominent Republican in that area who was charged with financial crimes or something else that he did, and juries of his peers found him not guilty and stuff that way. So you can have unbiased trials in states that are quote, liberal or democratic or whatnot that way. But it is bad how people automatically just assume that you can't trust the government in it because they've always been that way for us. They've never led us astray. But you do have those little fractures in the, in the armor, like the whole where they're going in for the oil in the Iraq shock and all, where they're going in for something else, where their ulterior motives, as opposed to just going into, to push away, like in the Pearl. What was it, the war in 91? Oh, man, I can't think of. What was it? Desert Storm. Yeah. Kuwait got invaded by Iraq, and we had to go in there to push them back, or they wanted NATO or the other countries to go do it that way. In 2003, there was no country. Iraq wasn't trying to move into any country. I think they just went in there to liberate the Iraqi families.
Weapons of mass destruction was the reason we told it, but there are a lot of experts, even in that moment. And we think about the few people who voted against it, like Bernie Sanders. Mm-hmm. And the idea was, hey, Al-Qaeda and Saddam have no ties to each other, so why would Saddam support them? And as much as people heard that, the most trusted person in that administration was Colin Powell. He goes to the UN and presents the case for war. He shows these mobile chemical weapon stations, and everybody's terrified. So then the UN told us not to go in. We go on with the coalition of the willing, and it's just a slippery slope. But as a history teacher, you see this, though. I remember the times when you're talking about Thanksgiving, and you tell kids, hey, that pilgrim story of Thanksgiving you hear, John Smith.
I've heard this
That
before.
really didn't happen. And they're like, why would they tell us these lies? And then Iran-Contra, right? When you explain, hey, why does the United States and Iraq dislike each other so much? It's because Iraq and Iran were at a war, and the United States was selling weapons to Iraq, and they weren't supposed to be selling weapons to Iran, but part of Reagan's administration, Oliver North and those guys, sold them to Iran, and then took the proceeds down to Latin America to the Contras and gave them that and started these two massive conflicts. Students are like, man, why don't you get that in the history books? And I'm like, because patriotism.
So do you think if you don't get the bad, then you don't get the, quote, good? I mean, you stop and think, before September 11th, if the government not going to do it and said, hey, we want to keep track of all the things you look at, things all you research and stuff, potentially put it on the radar as you might be a criminal in future terms. No, I don't want you doing that because I want to be private. I want to keep what I do to myself. I'm not going to be any kind of crazy person or do anything crazy or break the law. But after September 11th happened, it was like, no, man, we want those privacies taken away because we want to know what you're doing. We want to know what those people could potentially do futurely down the road. Does it lead to those things where then it makes the world, because this bad happened, let's go a little bit further with this, quote, good.
You're asking the founding fathers questions.
Yes.
Liberty or security.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, Mr. Cooper is a massive sports fan. If the United States government cracked into my devices, they'd be like, this man spends way too much time researching fantasy football, right? So Mr. Cooper automatically says, give me the security. But then it's like, I don't want the government tracking how I'm spending my money, though. I don't want the government tracking what vacations my family go on. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's such a slippery slope because you're like, you want that liberty, especially your own liberty.
Oh, yeah.
But the guy down the street who, always has a little bit too much stuff in the garbage can, maybe you're always looking at him weird, like, what is that guy up to? You don't care about his liberty. You want security. You want everybody paying attention.
It is very funny how when it affects you want them to be prosecuted to the fullest extent. You want to be able to get everything, knowledge, information about that person that's doing something, quote, you think is bad. But when you're the one underneath the microscope, no, I don't want that. I want you to stay arm's length from me because I'm not doing anything bad. I'm not doing anything interesting or nefarious and whatnot. It is interesting how people they flip one way or the other depending on what the situation is, if it's them underneath the microscope or someone else.
This goes back to that Make America Great Again, because it seems like for a lot of American history, your world felt small.
Oh, yeah.
So easily. You were tied to your own local community. Maybe that's a small town. Maybe that's even in a city, but you live in an enclave of people who are like you. But as we've progressed and cities and suburbs have changed, I mean, in my own neighborhood, in my cul-de-sac, we have people from Africa, we have people from Asia, we have Europeans. And so you just think like that cul-de-sac, in some great ways, we are the world. But in other ways, we are the world, So it's like your neighbors and you trust your neighbors, but it does feel a lot different than 40 years ago when maybe your neighbor was legitimately a family member. And maybe Mrs. Green down the street went to grade school with your grandmother. So you got she's basically your second grandma. And it was just so much closer. So felt like you had more liberty because you didn't think you needed security because you knew your community so well. But today, because of the growth of the suburbs and the cities, no longer do you have that feeling. So now America doesn't feel maybe as safe or as great anymore.
Yeah, but I mean, I think for as big as we've gotten, either suburban, the suburbs being big or the country being big or the companies or whatever it is you want to label, I don't think we can go back to being a smaller environment. I don't think you can live your head in the sand like an ostrich, like, hey, I only want to worry about my little 25, 30 square miles of the world that I live and work in. That way, you can't be that way anymore because we are such a global society or economy, however you want to go and do it. I know it's not whatever we happen here, like a butterfly effect, where whatever we do here is not going to affect people in the other side of the world, but if we do it on a grand scale, it will.
Yes, because we're now, maybe in those time periods, we're exclusive, and now we're intentionally inclusive. So when I think about me, it's like my childhood, I remember all my neighbors being very much from the same group, but my children are now going to school with kids from Ukraine and from Pakistan and from Kenya. So that's enriching their educational environment.
Oh, sure,
because now they're not learning about those places through books anymore. They're learning about it through personal experience, sometimes sitting in a cafeteria and saying, hey, your food looks a lot different than my food. At this school I work at, we have kids at the school now who are Muslims who once a day go into a room and pray. And I think for kids, that's like, oh, that's a unique situation. So in those ways, you think, man, that's very positive for our children. But maybe for older Americans, it's just like, man, we never had that.
And I don't ever recall it being a point of contention when, if you had somebody of a different religion that would go do certain things. Because I remember kids who were Jewish when I was growing up in school, we would do Christmas stuff, but they wouldn't participate
Yeah, me
because
too.
they were Jewish and they would do something differently. Or African Americans, students would do Kwanzaa or whatever they would go and do and stuff, and they would have different things. But it's interesting how much more divisive it is now because they're practicing their own religion, where it's almost because lack of understanding they are afraid of it, maybe by factual or incorrect information. It almost seems like.
Well, I think you hit it already. It's that 24-hour news cycle and social media. So back when we were kids, it was more like naive and not knowing, right? And then
Oh
when you
yeah.
don't know somebody, it's their impression, right? So I had a friend growing up named David whose family was Mormon. He taught me how to play chess. And so everything I knew about Mormonism, I knew because of my relationship with him and his family. Where today, people are afraid of other people a lot of time from misinformation they find through social media.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? You see a video on social media of something that's completely being blown out of proportion, but that's the education you're going with. So then when you have that encounter with David the Mormon, you're like, well, I saw this video on YouTube about Mormons and they do blank, 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 blank. So then
Yeah,
you
it
don't
gives
want
you-
to hang out with them.
Yeah. Well, also too, I know like with my mom and dad, if we ever had something we didn't understand, it's like, well, go ask them. So we would have that. You
Yeah.
would get that encouragement to go find out, to go seek out those strangers, to be like, hey, I see that you're new to my school here, or blah blah. You would talk to them and kind of sort of get them out of their shell they were in, because you were encouraged to make friends with people, because that's how you knew who went to school with you, who was in your neighborhood, in your towns, in your cities and stuff. And you're right. I don't think people are willing to do that way because they only know how to interact on social media with people, and that way you can be anonymous, people behind your keyboard warriors, where you can lob as much stuff as you can against somebody, which nobody would ever say in person, because there were consequences to walking up to somebody, stepping correctly to them, quote unquote. You would get hit in the face nowadays.
This is that Michael Moore idea of bowling for Columbine, like the loss of bowling leagues and baseball leagues and community squares. So like the public square where you might be able to take your kids to a bowling outing and bowl next to a family who might be from across the world, and you might have a conversation like your son and my son go to the same school, but now we don't do those things because we're so into our own group or pack that we're not stepping outside. And I think COVID probably played a big role into it. It's shocking to me how many people still aren't doing activities because of COVID. And trust me, I know that COVID is still around, but it's still people saying like, yeah, I can't put my hand in a bowling ball because of COVID. I'm like, people were disgusting way before COVID.
Oh yeah.
You
That
should
was
have been sanitizing your hands before putting your hands
that
in a
was
bowling ball.
that was one thing that I think, as weird as it sounds, I was mentally and physically prepared for COVID, because I work in IT, and going to somebody's computer, hey man, my computer doesn't work. Sniffle, 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 as they're putting their hands on their faces, and the mucus and stuff all over their hands, and having colds and stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'd come to them that way, and I'd get up, and I would be like, I was going to go into surgery. She's like, why are you walking that way? I said, I just got to go wash my hands. Well, why? Well, I just worked on somebody's keyboard, and they came in sick. And it's like, yeah, so I was always washing my hands now before COVID, because I didn't want that sickness with me and stuff with that way. But yeah, definitely is interesting on how the world is afraid now of dealing with people and the unknowns and whatnot. Does it make you want to? Is that another driving point that makes you want to go back to when it was great, when you lived in a smaller environment, when you knew your neighbors, when you knew the people who went to school with you, who shopped with you, who did those things?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that they're the part of everybody for the most. I mean, I would assume that you think about like being able to go down the street and see relatives. And I mean, when you go into certain stores, you probably can recognize some people by their name or the name tag, but there's probably a time period where there was like family-owned restaurants in the neighborhood, and everybody went there on Friday nights, and everybody was familiar with each other. And I just think that there's probably communities still like that. There's probably some people who are like, I hate this style of community, I want out of it. But I do think that for some people, it's like, this week, J.D. Vance, they asked him about childcare. And his answer was That's what grandma and the aunts are for. And a lot of people criticize them for it. But what he was saying had a lot of truth to it because for a very long time, child care was Big Mama or somebody in your family who wasn't working at the time. And we just don't live in that time period anymore because of the fact that now most families need two people contributing to the income to take care of the mortgage.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, it's definitely a different time so I do understand the intention of Make America Great Again because they want to go back to when it was ... this way or whatever that way, but you just can't do it that way because Pandora's already out of Pandora's box. I don't think we can go back. I think you can struggle to go back to when it was a simpler, kinder, more straightforward environment, but I just don't think we can do it that way.
yeah, man, I wish I knew this song. There's a hip hop song where a dude is rapping and he's daydreaming about can we go back to when things were just easier? And it's like that idea of being able to roll it back and slow it down a little bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've kept thinking about this when you were talking about earlier, when the kids in your class about this feels like a third party, of the Making America Great Again, those kind of sort of group of folks that way. I can remember when there truly was a third party of independence and how much, the independent, and how much it rocked, the whole thing with if Ross Perot never runs, then Bill Clinton potentially would never have won because then they would have split the ticket with, Herbert Walker. So then it makes it, so that truly was an independent because it almost made it seem like he had all the money Ross Perot did. He didn't like the fact that he didn't win his Republican candidacy to be the primary candidate. You know what? I'm going to run my own way because I got my own money. The heck with you guys. And he did, but it kind of sort of rocked it from the standpoint of I don't think America was ready to see a third party of, well, wait a minute, you're not going to accept what you've happened here, so now you're going to do your own thing? And it almost kind of sort of had some negative connotations to it then that people didn't realize until much later in life.
Here's the real question. Is the traditional Republican Party now the third party and MAGA have emerged as the second party? So now are the Democrats versus the new image of MAGA as the Republican Party. And now you're seeing Mitt Romney, who's a traditional conservative, on the outside. Liz Cheney came out this week and endorsed Kamala Harris. So it just makes you think, wait, so maybe now they're the third party.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how the way the world is kind of sort of structured now to the way it was before. I mean, to me, they are almost like little spots in the road. If you never have this, you don't have that.
Oh, butterfly effect. You already, it's like, I think about Ralph Nader in '99 because Nader's on the ballot in Florida. And those Nader voters vote for Gore. Gore's the president. No need for a lawsuit. Mm-hmm. So it's always that, man. And I think in this election, Kennedy, I've never met a Kennedy voter. But according to the polls, there are people out there who like Kennedy. And he dropped out and endorsed Trump, and then he tried to take himself off of ballots in Wisconsin and Michigan. And those state courts told him he couldn't. Mm-hmm. Some of those lawsuits are being sued up to the Supreme Court. So what happens if the Supreme Court overrules it? He ends up being in the closely contested states that are leaning Harris, and maybe he could trim off that margin.
Yeah, he would split some of the vote there for Trump himself.
Somebody right now is saying, remember when British North America was great again? And we just had a king and we didn't have to worry about elections?
Yeah, it is interesting how everything, like we've mentioned in one of the podcast episodes some time ago, that everything is cyclical. Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it sometimes. And it definitely feels like that, well, wait, we should do it this way because we're going to blaze a trail. And somebody knocks on your head, hey, man, it happened already this way. Go back to this time in the world or those things that way. So,
no way to do it, though. I'm always telling students, we can talk about the past, but we're better off focusing on the future and trying to problem solve to fix the future rather than going back to try to repair the past. because there's no time machine that can get us backwards.
To me, every time somebody says, well, if I could go back, think of two things. Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite. Man, if he could put me back in, I could have gone all state. That, and then the second thing is the definition of insanity, doing the same thing twice, expecting a different result.
Well, Uncle Rico actually did find a time machine. He just changed his name to Gardner Minshew, and he's starting for the Raiders in Vegas this weekend. So some people have all the luck.
So, yeah, you're right. So see how we bring it back full circle and everything is the way it is that way. By all means, feel free to send us some emails, thoughts, questions. I know my wife, she's an avid listener to the podcast. I know Cooper's telling me that his kids had already asked them this week because we accidentally didn't have time to get together last week to do it. And they're like, Dad, when you go put the podcast out? So we're doing it today. Hopefully you'll get it here in the next couple of days. But shout out to all the fans out there in the world. We picked up another country. I know we mentioned Brazil and Norway, and now Australia and it wasn't Norway. There was like 4. Oh, Brazil. That was the other one. So now we picked up some South American countries, man. So we're branching out there in the world.
And remember what I said about the sponsor opportunities. If you're sitting at home on some Mythos, what's the name of the place?
Mythos is the name.
Mythos coupons or something, ship them over.
Yeah, send it to us at dosechipod@gmail.com. And again, since we always do a theme, I was trying to find that song, but I couldn't think too many of them that way. I like this one. So we'll do America the Beautiful. These 4 lines. Oh, beautiful for patriot dream that sees beyond the years. Thy alabaster city gleams, undimmed by human tears. So that's will be our lyric for the week. So thanks again for listening to the podcast. My name is Efren. With me always is Coop.
Peace. Have a great week.